Welcome to Hope One Live, ladies and gentlemen. You're at home right now. You're sequestered. You're probably spending more time with your family. And you've got conversations that you want to initiate with people about what really matters. Is there a God? Did Jesus rise from the dead? Is Christianity true? But you feel like, I don't know if I'm qualified to even start a conversation. How do I start a conversation? How do I keep a conversation going? How do I respond when people bring up objections to Christianity and I don't even know the answer? What do I do? Well, there's nobody on the planet better to deal with that and give you real practical ideas on how to tactically navigate and control a conversation about what's really important in life. And that's my friend Greg Koukl of Stand to Reason. He's written or updated and expanded his classic book, Tactics. This is the 10th anniversary edition. And if you don't have it, consider yourself undereducated, because this has about 40% new material from the first Tactics, and it's even updated in the old material. So this is something you want to get your hands on very quickly. And Greg is going to be our guest here for the entire hour. Let me bring him on right now. All the way from the left coast, from California, is Greg Koukl. And Greg, my first question is, have you had your first cup of coffee yet?
I'm working on it, Frank. You know, and I've said to others before, my first cup of coffee, I'm an atheist. So I've actually had 3 sips, and I'm just becoming a Jehovah's Witness right now. So,
all right, very good, very good. So you're not
maybe by the end of our hour, I'll be a full-fledged theist. So.
All right. Excellent. Well, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to navigate conversations, and your book, right, Tactics, has given people real world strategies on how to do that. And right now, Greg, when we're all cooped up and we're seeing our family members a lot more than when we normally see them, maybe some of our relatives, and we're talking to friends on social media, and that, now is the time especially to use Tactics when people are more open to the gospel than maybe they have been in the past, because they're dealing with their mortality. At least they think they are. So give us kind of an overview of the new Tactics book. And then I want to ask you a couple of questions about another book you've written. And then we're going to come back to Tactics and give people some real practical ideas. What's new about the 10th anniversary edition?
Well, after 10 years of doing the Tactics, 10 years ago, let's see, that would have been 2009. Mm-hmm. I've learned a lot of things about how not only to use the Tactics in my personal life, but also how to teach it more effectively. And so after 10 years, I thought, you know, I got a lot of stuff that I want to add and update to what I've already said. And so consequently, I thought, let's just get together. Let's talk to my publisher. Let's crank out a 10th anniversary edition, which is what I did. And you were right when you said I've taken the existing chapters and refreshed them and refurbished them. In fact, there was so much that I added to some of the chapters that I had to break them down into 2 chapters because there were so many more things that I wanted to talk about and articulate and expand on, especially the concept, the distinction between what I call gardening and harvesting. I mean, very quickly, you can't have a harvest unless you have a season of gardening. This is true in any individual's life, okay? People come to Christ, they don't come to Christ overnight. There's a process in their life. And we have a focus on harvesting. That's what our pamphlets are and our 4 steps to peace with Christ and stuff like that. And a lot of Christians just don't want to get into play because they figure the only way that they can share Christ is if they're pressing for a decision for Christ. And I think that's a mistaken approach. We inherited that from the Jesus movement, largely even before that, but it's just something people need more time now. And so what I've tried to emphasize more than ever before, Frank, is that the tactical approach is a gardening approach. Don't worry about leading people to Christ. My conviction is that kind of takes care of itself when the gardening is done properly. You garden well, you're going to have a harvest. The harvest happens naturally from good gardening. And you see the same thing in the New Testament, and that's been my experience as well. So I expanded on those concepts to explain them more clearly. And then I've added new stuff. I have a chapter on a tactic called Inside Out, which trades on it's more like an insight into what it means to be human than anything else. It's a general approach. And that is that everybody knows some very foundational truths about the world, which are foundational to Christianity. Okay. And even though they're atheistic, they still adhere to these truths. I think in your own book, Stealing from God, which trades on the same notion. Atheists or skeptics or naysayers of all sorts, they cannot stop affirming the Christian worldview in the way they talk, even when in their arguments they deny it. So think of it this way: that which is inside, built in by God himself in virtue of them being made in the image of God, always comes outside, especially when they're not thinking about it, when they're not guarding turf. And I give a lot of examples of that. The classic example, of course, is when a person says he's a moral relativist, but then condemns you for pushing your morality on him. But wait a minute, if morality is just an individual matter and my morality allows pushing the morality in other people, then how could it be wrong from his perspective? The fact is, everybody's a moral realist when push comes to shove, so to speak, especially when people are trying to be relativistic towards the relativists. So there's a chapter there.
Greg, let me say something about that, because I was actually reading that chapter this morning in the 10th anniversary edition, and it seems to me this coronavirus situation provides another example of that, because despite the fact that someone like Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris or other atheists might claim that there are no objective moral values, of course, actually Sam Harris tries to say there are. He just tries to ground them in human flourishing, but he has no reason or no standard by which to say human flourishing should be the standard. In any event, other atheists, Richard Dawkins, will say, we just dance to our DNA and all this. There is no atheist, no theist, nobody in the public square that I see right now who is saying that, we ought to just let people die. It's just survival of the fittest, right? They're admitting that human beings are valuable by what comes out of them during this crisis, even though in another sense, in their academic work, they'll say, no, there's nothing special about human beings.
Right. What they might want to do is cover their tracks a little bit by saying, well, all I'm saying is it's in my self-interest to protect myself from the coronavirus. But the fact is, when you listen to people talk about things like this and other kind of natural disasters, what they're doing is they're reflecting on these things in an objectively moral way. They're not saying, oh, well, I just don't like getting sick, or I don't like that my grandma died through COVID-19 or whatever. What they're saying is there is something wrong with it.
Right.
And you and I were talking a little off the air about some things I wrote in the Story of Reality that kind of makes sense of this from the Christian perspective. And one of the things that I actually, in a certain sense, as an apologist, I really like the problem of evil. And the reason I like the problem of evil is not because I like evil, but I like the problem that it presents for the non-Christian, particularly the atheist, okay? A lot of people think that the problem of evil is a big argument against us, against God. It's not. It turns out to be a great argument for God, but a really strong argument against atheism. And I'll tell you why. And I explained this in the Story of Reality. There's one thing that everybody knows about the world. It doesn't matter when they lived or where they lived. They know that something is wrong with the world.
No matter what the world do. That's right.
Exactly. When they're defending turf, like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins or something, they're going to say, there's no good, there's no evil, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. There's Dawkins, That's when they're doing their academic work. But when they're being real people in the world, all these other things come out of their mouth that betray their real convictions. That's the inside-out tactic. So everybody knows, let's face it, everybody knows there's something wrong with the world. Things aren't the way they're supposed to be, which is why the problem of evil is brought up so frequently in so many environments, even with regards to COVID-19. Okay? Gee, look at this. How do you explain that kind of thing? And my response is, we don't have to explain it. We predict it. The Christian worldview predicts this kind of thing. This is exactly the kind of world that you'd expect to exist if the Christian take on reality is true. And let me put it in a very kind of folksy way. People say, well, things aren't the way they're supposed to be, which I agree with. But notice you can't have a way they're not supposed to be unless there's a way that they are supposed to be. And you can't have a way they are supposed to be without a sposer. There's got to be a God who sets the standard for the way the world should be, which then gets violated by evil. And if there is no God, then there is no way the world is supposed to be. Okay? And if there's no way the world is supposed to be, then it can't be the way it's not supposed to be, right?
Right.
And you're just stuck with things that are. And by the way, that's when we get back to Dawkins' statement, which I think is accurate for his worldview: no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That's the world we're left with. But we actually know better as human beings made in the image of God. And so COVID-19 turns out to be an affirmation in many ways of the basic structure of the Christian worldview. Now, it does raise other questions, that we can address. But the core of it is, if there is no God, there can't be any evil. And COVID-19 and all the wreckage and death that it causes is just something that happens. That's all. It's just stuff. That's all.
Greg, it strikes me that we know more about the morality of COVID-19 than we do the science. In other words, we know it's wrong to allow a virus to indiscriminately kill people when we can stop it. Then we even know about what the death rate of this virus is, what the transmission rate of this virus is. That's why the models are so wacky, because we don't have enough scientific data. We know more about the morality than we do about the science.
That's a good observation. I hadn't thought about that.
Well, actually, it comes from your mentor. He didn't say it this way, but when I was reading J.P. Moreland's book on scientism, he said, we know it's wrong to torture babies for fun. We know that with more certainty than we know what theory of electron we currently believe in.
Correct. Yeah.
So I'm just trading on his insight that's true. I want to deal with one other insight you had that it comes from your book, The Story of Reality, which is another great book that people ought to have. Before we go to some of the specific tactics that people can use, and it's this, Greg. I remember you saying this. We were together in New York a number of years ago, and you said that the Christian story, the truth of Christianity, the entire Christian theme, the entire Christian story from Genesis to Revelation is really an answer to the problem of evil.
Right.
Can you unpack that for us right now?
Sure. This goes back to a comment I made a few moments ago when I said that we don't have to explain these things. Our story predicts it. It turns out that even though the problem of evil occurs to people to be a very strong argument against theism in general and Christianity, it turns out that the problem of evil is what our story is all about. If there were no problem of evil, there would be no story. The problem of evil starts in chapter 3 of our story, and 66 books later, the whole story is about where evil came from and how God restores the world that somebody else broke, and that would be us. Okay, and so the entire story is about it. So I make 2 points really about this in the story of reality, and that is that our whole story is about the problem of evil. But secondly, our story is not over yet. So we are in the midst of this thing. It's almost like, I know you're in the military, and so was I. So I'm going to use the military metaphor. It's almost like we know, as the plan at least, with Normandy invasion and the Second World War, taking back the continent from the Third Reich, we know the strategy, and we had the capability, certainly with the manpower, et cetera, to accomplish the task eventually if we would just stick to our guns. Germany's surrounded; they're landlocked pretty much. They limited resources. We had unlimited stuff. We're going to win this. It's inevitable that we're going to win if we keep going. Okay. However, even though we know our big plan and why the battle itself is justified, how it all fits together in the big picture, that doesn't explain why one soldier dies on a particular battlefield from a particular piece of shrapnel on a particular day. Those are the things we can't know. And in a certain sense, this applies here in the problem of evil. We can step back and see, looking at our full story, why there's a problem of evil and how to fix the problem of evil, how God is fixing it, how he's rescuing us. And he first rescues the evildoers before he repairs the world that is broken by evil. That's the sequence, okay? But when we look, we understand the big picture, and that's consoling in some measure. Yet at the same time, when individuals who are important to us are casualties in the battle, of course it's natural to ask, why did my grandmother or my daughter or my wife or my husband suffer in this particular way under these circumstances? And frankly, those are questions that you and I can't answer because they're hidden in the mind of God. He knows, but he hasn't told us. We get the big picture, and we can understand how the big picture works. And this is one of the things that I think is the strength of the Christian account of reality, the story of reality. I think it's the true story because it accounts for the details of the story that we're aware of in a really powerful way. And not only that, good news, it gives us hope.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
A plus.
And that's what this is about. We want to give people hope. So that book, Story of Reality, is kind of like a modern day Mere Christianity. That's what I said in my review of it. It's only been out a couple of years. If you haven't read it yet, folks, it's a great book to get. Story of Reality. It won't take you that long. It's not a huge book, 180 or so pages. And Greg goes through the real story of reality. And even if you're not a Christian, this is your story because it's just the truth. And
it's the story of reality. Yeah.
Right? Whether you know it or not, it's your story. But Greg, let's talk about some tactics now. Give some people some practical things that they can use as they're conversing with their friends and relatives during this difficult time.
Sure.
Is there a way that you found a good way to start the gardening process? You know, to bring up a spiritual subject, or to at least get the conversation directed in that manner right now, right away, and then we can talk about how to navigate once the conversation starts.
Yeah, sure. We practiced the tactical approach at Standard Reason, been teaching it for a long, long time, even before the book came out. We have a number of different tactics that have names, like suicide and taking the roof off, and just the facts, and an inside out, which I just mentioned, and a new one, what a friend we have in Jesus. There are different maneuvers and conversations that allows the Christian to stay in the driver's seat of the conversation. That's the key. It's not to manipulate, it's not to control in an inappropriate way, it's not to push people around, but to stay in the driver's seat, okay? Now, but there is one tactic that serves as the game plan proper, and the other tactics abet the game plan, okay? And this gets to the heart of the answer to your question. How do you maneuver most effectively, generally speaking, in conversations? And the tactic that I'm going to mention in just a moment is the simplest tactic imaginable to stop a challenger in their tracks, to turn the tables, and to get them thinking. And the tactic has a name, and the name is Columbo. Now, a lot of people who are younger maybe not heard of Columbo, but most people who are certainly our age and anyone older than a millennial has experienced Lieutenant Columbo 20 or 30 or 40 years ago on TV. And the kind of what appears to be somewhat absent-minded detective who scratches his head all the time and always looks confused, but he's stupid like a fox because he has a technique that gets him where he wants to go and helps him get the murderer. And that is he uses questions in a very particular kind of way. And at the outset, and this is especially applicable to your question here, at the outset, he uses his questions in a very innocent fashion. Yeah, in a very innocent fashion. And the innocent way is just to, scratch his head and say, do you mind if I ask you a question, and start drawing people out? Now, I found that this is the best way to maneuver in a conversation. And that is to not necessarily be the one who is giving the line that causes you to get into a conversation. This is what a lot of people are looking for. What's the best opening line? And I'll suggest something in a few moments. But I found the best thing is not to be active, but in a certain sense to be reactive. And all I mean is that we are listening. we are paying attention. And then when we hear something that gives us an opportunity to ask a question that can lead us maybe deeper into a spiritual thing, that's when we do that. Now, I'll tell you why this is important. It's because, first of all, we're trading off of what the other person is saying, okay? And so we're involving them right away. Secondly, since we're asking a question, we're showing curiosity in their point of view, which is polite. Thirdly,
Right.
we're not preaching. We're letting them do more of the talking. And as we let them do more of the talking and they talk more about their own idea, that gives us more to work with, potentially, and it buys us time to think about where we're going to go next. Look at, conversations, spiritual conversations are not always easy.
No.
Duh, right?
Mhm.
And so what this technique involves, this tactical approach, is kind of probing to find out where you have genuine opportunity to move a little forward. It's not super aggressive, at least on the face of it. We're not pushing people around. And by the way, a lot of Christians don't like that approach anyway. And so they're going to sit on the bench because they don't want to go out there, get all pushy and try to get people to receive Christ, because then they get mad at them and all that other stuff. So all we're going to do is do a little tilling and disking. So I'll give you an example of how this might happen with COVID. It's based on what we were talking about a few moments ago, how a disease assault like what we've experienced raises questions about the existence of a good God in the world. Okay, gee, how could you say your God is loving? How could this happen? Okay, so this is where I'm going to ask a question, and my first question is always a question meant to gather more information, and I want to get more information as much as I can from the other person about the nature of their objection, because I know if this person is complaining about evil in the world, he has not got a leg to stand on unless he's some sort of theist. He cannot make sense of this. So I'm going to just ask him a lot of questions. And I'm going to ask initially some form of the question, what do you mean by that? And so when the objection comes up, well, this is awful, man. This is terrible. Yeah, I agree. It's terrible too. But I'm kind of curious about what you're saying, because you used some words before, like you actually think it's something evil. Yeah, it's terrible. Well, wait a minute. Aren't you an atheist? Oh, yeah, I am. Well, now I'm confused. Okay, when you say that COVID-19 is evil and what's happening to people is evil, what is it that you actually mean by that? Now, just taking a break here from the role play, Frank, I know what I mean when I say it's evil. I mean it's not the way it's supposed to be, because there's a supposer who says how it's supposed to be. Okay, but when it comes to the atheist, there's no supposer. And so now what? So I want to know, what do you, are you just saying you don't like it? Oh, well, okay, I'm curious why anybody should care if you like it or not. I mean, maybe some people do like this. Okay, think about it. Most of the people who die from COVID-19 are old. Okay, they're getting off the welfare roll, right? This is good economic. Maybe somebody might reason that way. That's not my view, just so you're clear about that.
Or, my grandmother has passed on. Now I get her inheritance. There may be people thinking that like that, right?
Yeah, of course. There are lots of people like that. We know that. So there are some people that might have the point of view that knocking off a bunch of old people is actually going to be good for them. So what is the basis of objecting? So notice how I'm taking their point of view seriously, but and those who are familiar with your book, Stealing from God, know exactly what I'm doing here. I'm taking that view seriously, and then I'm trying to help them to see that they have no right to claim that this is actually objectively evil, given the worldview that they have. But notice, I just stated the fact there. I don't say that to the people. I'm not preaching at them. I am trying to use my questions to help them to see that what they believe does not fit the way the world actually is. And if your beliefs don't fit the way the world is, that's the classical definition of error, falsehood. You're got it wrong.
For those of you who are thinking, well, Frank, you just brought up such a crass example that somebody would actually want their grandmother to die so they could get the inheritance. Well, if you think that's terrible, that anyone would even think that or suggest that, you're again implying there's a moral standard out there that nobody should think that or suggest that. So you can't get away from it. If you don't even like the dialogue Greg and I are having right now, you think, oh, these guys are jerks, or these guys are immoral, or if they even talk this way, you are again implying there's a standard. And the question that Greg is going to ask you is, what do you mean by that standard? What do you mean by evil? Where did this come from? Continue, Greg. What else would you say?
Yeah, well, I'm going to make a distinction first in this discussion that I hinted at a few moments ago. I want to know what the complaint that the person is raising is simply a personal, subjectivistic, a relativistic, I don't like that kind of thing, kind of complaint, because they're welcome to that. If they're saying, I don't like Frank or Greg talking this way, all right, well, you don't like what you don't like. What am I going to, what do I say to that? But if what they mean when they say, when they complain is that I don't like it because it's wrong, oh, now they're saying something else. Now they're going outside of themselves to a standard they're implying that has been broken by us because we're nasty people. Okay, what's wrong with being nasty? You're not supposed to be that way. Really? Says who? Your grandma? Come on. Okay, so we play the relativistic card back on them to show them, you want to live in your world? Okay, fine. Then you're welcome there, but do not tread, don't pretend like things are actually wrong when you apparently do not believe that from what you said, okay?
Now notice, friends, when Greg is using these questions, he doesn't have any real pressure on him because he doesn't really even have to know much. You don't have to know much to ask questions. You have to know much to answer questions. And so if you continually ask questions, by the way, like Jesus did, people can tie themselves up in knots. So what do you mean by that is a great question, because you're getting some clarification and people then have to support. In fact, you always say this, Greg, so I'll let you say it about when somebody says something, it's not your job to refute what they say. Go ahead, complete that.
Oh, yeah. So this brings us to kind of the second step of the game plan. Remember, the subtitle of the book is The Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions, okay? So it is a very practical game plan, a step by step by step. And as you get better at it, it moves around a little bit more. But basically, we start, as I said, with gathering information. You just need to get some intel, right? You got to get the lay of the land before you can move further. The second step, though, is called reversing the burden of proof. Reversing the burden of proof. Okay, now the burden of proof is the responsibility that somebody has in the conversation to give reasons for a point of view, an argument or something like that, rationale, evidence. Okay, so who bears the burden? And here's the way the rule works. Whoever makes the claim bears the burden. Whoever makes the claim bears the burden. So if somebody makes a claim, especially if it's controversial, well, this politician, you know, he's on the take. All right. Well, wait a minute. Okay, that's a pretty bold claim that you're making against another person.
Right.
It becomes the responsibility of the person making the bold claim to defend the bold claim, okay? And the way this works out in conversation, it's not, if you're accused of a crime, it's the district attorney's job to prove that you're guilty. It's not your job to prove that you're innocent, all right? Basic concept, everybody understands it, but they don't apply it oftentimes in conversations, because what the atheist will do, or the skeptic or the non-believer will do, will conjure up some kind of alternate worldview or situation. They'll say, well, I can explain that. And then they'll offer an alternate view. They'll make a claim contrary to yours. Then it feels like the Christian has the responsibility to refute that view, when in fact, it's not our job to refute that view. It is their job to defend it. And that's why at this point, I always ask this question, how did you come to that conclusion? Well, I'm not going to try to refute them first. That's giving them a free ride. First, I'm going to try to get them to give me the reasons for their view. And again, the ball is in their court.
Hey, before we go on, I got to tell our many viewers right now that I know you want to ask Greg some questions. We're going to get to questions here in about 7 minutes, I hope, 7 to 10 minutes. So if you want to ask Greg a question, put the big word question in capital letters on the Facebook stream or the YouTube stream and write a complete, succinct question in complete English. And if it's succinct, we'll see if we can take it. If it's not succinct, we're going to go right by it. All right. So get ready for questions. Just type them in the YouTube stream or the Facebook stream. So What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Those are two of the primary questions that I, echoing you, Greg, always tell people. I tell them to get your book, and then I say, those are the two questions that you should always have in your arsenal. When you ask questions, it's easy. When you answer them, it's hard. So let's back up for a second, Greg. If you're with your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, your son, whoever, and you want to start a conversation on spiritual issues where you could then use these tactics, how would you start it in today's environment? What question might you ask them?
Well, I mentioned a few moments ago that for the most part, my approach is reactive to the circumstances, the statements people are making. I'm listening, okay? But when you get into the context of the issue of death, there's a really good question, and this isn't my question. I heard it from J. Warner Wallace, and Wallace got it from somebody else. I can't remember the guy. You probably know who said this first. But this question is very simple, and it's very, it gets kind of right into the meat of things, but in a sweet kind of generous way that is not too alarming, okay? And here's the way I would introduce it. I'll role play it for you just a bit. I would say, I have a thing I'm thinking about, and I'm wondering people's opinion about this, okay? Because I've been thinking a lot about it, and if you don't answer the question, it's okay. I understand that. But I'm curious, what do you think happens when you die?
Yeah, Ray
what
Comfort.
Do you think happens?
Ray Comfort had that similar question last week on the show. He sometimes asks the question, do you think there's an afterlife? Similar question, yes.
Yeah. I like the way Jay Warner reflected. I think it's just a little bit, I don't know. I just like it better. Afterlife is a religious word. So I think it's keeping it more neutral. What do you think happens when you die? And so this gives them an opportunity. By the way, this is a genuine question. It is not merely, please understand, it is not merely a stepping stone to a gospel assault, all right? You want to know what the other person thinks, okay? You want to treat them as a valuable individual and reflect their point of view. Respect their point of view. So you're listening. Now, by the way, I don't know what you're going to hear. There's all kinds of things that you could hear from people. And this is going to give you an education about the things that people think about. We want to know, that's the intel. We want to know what the other side, is thinking. And it might turn out that they haven't thought very much about this, right? And so now your question forces them to think a little bit more carefully about something that's kind of sitting right outside their back door now with the coronavirus deaths. And so this is imminent right now. The issue broadly is imminent. What do you think happens when you die? Oh man, I've never even thought about that. Or they might say, I've been thinking about that lately too because of all this going on, or something like that. And then see what they say. That's it. Now, if there's any ambiguity or lack of clarity in anything they say, this is where you bring your question. What do you mean by that? Or in some form, back into the conversation. Say, okay, well, I'm a little unclear about this. And after you get a clearer idea of what they do or don't believe, maybe they think, we just end up in the grave. Then this is an opportunity for your second question, just out of curiosity. Why do you think that when we die and biological activity ceases and we flatline, that we are gone? Why would you think that? Maybe if that's their view, like an atheistic view.
Sure.
Why would you think that? And then see what they say. Now, when they give the reasons, this gives you something more, at least potentially, to work with. It may be that you can't answer that. They might say, well, I can't believe because, I can't believe in a God I can't see, and God's necessary for the afterlife or whatever. They'll say something, and you might be like, I don't know what to say. Okay, and then you don't. That's okay. What you've done is you've gotten a little bit of an education about that individual's point of view and put you in a better position in the future to come back and talk to them more. As you know, Frank, the more you know about these things, the more you're capable of responding and using other kinds of questions to move forward. And for people who watch your college campus interactions, when you do your talks, your Q&A, and I know Jorge's putting this stuff up all the time. You guys are really good about that. you are using these techniques all the time. If people want to have a great tutorial and how this works, watch Frank, because he does a great job on campus with this.
Well, this is where I get all those tactics from, and you should get the book if you don't have it, friends. This is the 10th anniversary edition, and it's got the little red label there that says that. And by the way, even if you're an atheist, we have atheists watching right now, this book is going to help you just to converse with people. You don't need to be a Christian to read this, because what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? That you ought to be asking that of Christians.
Right.
You ought to. Now, here's the problem, though, for the atheist. If you're presupposing Christians and all of us ought to be reasonable, my question would be why? Where does reason come from? Why can our minds ascertain truths about the real world? Why is this world orderly that we can actually reason to true conclusions or valid conclusions? In a materialistic atheist world, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
So
let me say something about that, Frank. I just did hitchhike on that comment. When my daughter, who's now 15, was about 8 years old, she asked me, "How do we know God is real? Is what or God is true?" Is the way she put it as an 8-year-old. How do we know that God is true? Right. And I thought about for a few moments, I'm the apologist, have to come up with the answers, but now it's my daughter. And I'm trying to put it in language that she can understand. And this phrase came to mind. And I think it's really, really not only appropriate concept for our conversations, but I realize that this really is what's behind my entire approach to defending Christianity and the Christian worldview. And the phrase that came to my mind is, I said, honey, the reason that we believe God is true is because he's the best explanation for the way things are. Let me just say it again. The reason we believe God is true is because he's the best explanation for the way things are. And this goes, Frank, to what might be called the explanatory power of the Christian worldview. Yes. The concept, of course, that you trade on very aggressively in stealing from God, and is really at the heart of a lot of what all of us do when we're making our case. Our worldview can explain this significant feature of reality. We were just talking about morality, for example. That's a feature of reality. Our world is thick with morality. We're running into it all the time. We are aware of it all the time. And it just doesn't do to say, well, morality is just an illusion, a trick that Darwinian evolution has played on us. They don't actually believe this, so we can tell by their speaking.
Yeah, in fact, the reason we're all home right now is because of morality.
Because we're taking care of we're trying to protect other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we have an obligation to do that, right?
So Christianity is the best explanation for the way things really are.
That's it. That's right.
Yeah,
when you look at
the
particulars, it's so interesting when Richard Dawkins can say that this is the kind of world that you would expect we'd have if evolution were true. No good, no evil, no purpose, no plan, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, right? But his statement is completely upside down because there is nothing about this world that reflects no purpose, no plan, no good, no evil, just blind, pitiless indifference. It's just the opposite. And in other words, the world fits our explanation of reality, the Christian worldview, not the atheists. And that is a powerful argument for our side.
Greg, I could listen to you talk about this for hours. This show goes too quickly. We got to go to questions and want to go to questions of our listeners. So let's bring Jorge on, our viewers, and go to questions as quickly as we can. We want to get as many questions in as we can. So just give them the short answer if you can, Greg, because we got a ton of people asking questions. Let's go.
Yes,
all right, I'll do my best.
Hey, fellas, let's start. Hello, Sanchez Martinez. Good morning. Hello from the Dominican Republic. Question: how should we begin a conversation with an atheist about Christ?
Well, this is where we touched on this just a little bit. And my suggestion is the safest way, and I'm suggesting this because I know even though your questioner may be aggressive enough to want to punch in and initiate, most people are not going to do that. And so this is why what I suggest is to stay alert to the conversations. I promise you, if you're in a conversation with an atheist and they reveal that they're an atheist, you can ask them a question. What kind of atheist are you? There are different types of atheists. And so, well, then they can explain. Maybe they're materialists, maybe not. Maybe they believe in objective morality, maybe not. So find out. And then, well, why are you an atheist? Okay. Notice that you're responding to the circumstance. You are listening to what they say, and then you are asking clarification questions about anything that may relate to a spiritual issue. That would be, I think, the best suggestion I can give. Rather than trying to punch a hole into a circumstance in an awkward and maybe an unnatural way, listen to what the other people say. And insofar as their statements touch on a broader worldview concern, and by the way, this happens all the time, value, purpose, morality, significance, as it touches on that, that's when we can begin asking questions about exactly what they mean by those things and how do they justify it.
Excellent. Becky Euling asks, what is the best way to use apologetics in Sunday school, especially with teens?
Well, in Sunday school, what you generally are doing is studying the Bible. You have Bible lessons, okay? People don't realize it who are not familiar with apologetics, but the Bible is filled with examples of apologetics. Think of Pentecost Sunday, right? So the Holy Spirit descends, there, Acts chapter 2, on the disciples. There's a big wind. There are tongues of fire. They spill out of the upper room. They're speaking in languages they don't know, okay? It's a big commotion. People think they're drunk. Peter says, we're not drunk. It's only 9 a.m. This isn't alcohol. This is the Holy Spirit. What you see and hear. So notice that he starts out by making reference to evidences that are available to them right then. Here, and by the way, this is happening because Joel prophesied it, so it's a fulfillment of prophecy. There's another evidence. And here's why it's happening, he says. It's because, that guy that you killed, you put him on the cross, you can't keep a good man down. 3 days later, he rose from the dead, and we are eyewitnesses to that. What is that? That's more evidence. And then he said, and by the way, that's also prophesied by David in the Psalms. So there we have, I just wonder how many people who are pastors who have preached on Acts chapter 2 numerous times and never saw that it's thick with apologetics. We see the example right there. Jesus in John chapter 5 says, look, you won't believe because of what I say. I'm only one witness. Well, why don't you believe because of what Moses says and what the scripture says and what John the Baptist said in support of me, or what the miracles say in support? In other words, Jesus himself is going on one after another of the additional sources of confirming evidence that support his statements about himself. So if we keep our minds alert, if we're teaching young people in Sunday school, we can teach them the basic concept of apologetics in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 16, that we make a defense. And then as we have opportunity, we're always pointing out examples of when this is happening in Scripture.
Right.
One quick comment on that, Jorge, because many teens in today's culture are really concerned about the sexual issues. And I think one question needs to be answered or presented to them and answered. And that question is, does love require approval? Does love require approval? And a moment's reflection should get them to realize no, because if any parent approves of everything their kid wants to do, that parent is not loving. The parent needs to stand in the way of evil. And so the question gets back to a moral question: what is good and what is evil? And I did a presentation at Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, just before they shut down. It's on our website, on the YouTube channel here, called Does Love Require Approval? And it deals with the sexual issues. And it makes me think of a tactic that Greg has in his book as well, called What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Can you explain that in a minute or so, Greg, on this issue in particular?
Yeah, this is one of the new tactics in the chapter on mini tactics. And the simple concept here is, if you can get Jesus to make your point in what he teaches, it's better than us making our point, because he has more credibility than we do. And by the way, when people make the statement, well, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality, and what they think that means is that Jesus approves of it, they are using the same tactic. They're trying to get Jesus on their team. So in the case of the idea, understanding of marriage and sexuality, this is a great place to let Jesus do your fighting for you. And you can go to Matthew 19, and there Jesus is talking about divorce and remarriage, but he's answering the question about divorce by going back to the beginning to show God's purpose for marriage originally. And to sum up Jesus, he says that God's purpose is one man with one woman becoming one flesh for one lifetime. Really simple. By the way, the one flesh part, that's the sex part. So what God approves is one man with one woman. Notice binary sexuality. Jesus believed in binary sexuality. Okay. You think he was wrong? Okay. Jesus believed in sex inside of the protective environment of marriage. Do you think he was mistaken? Jesus believed that this needed to be a lifetime commitment. Do you think Jesus was wrong on this issue? Notice how I'm invoking Jesus and what Jesus says against the cultural standard instead of putting myself out there. Because it's a lot harder to say that Jesus was mistaken. That's what a friend we have in Jesus.
That's good. Yeah.
Excellent. I want to answer a quick question here by Dwayne Mitchell. He says, at the moment, will CIA still happen in August in Plano, Dallas? And Frank, answer that.
It will still happen unless some unforeseen event comes up, like another virus. But look, viruses can't survive in Dallas in August. Most people can't survive in Dallas in August. So we're going to go there, and we're going to do CIA. And Greg is one of our headliners, as you know, as well as David Wood, Richard Howe, Jay Warner Wallace, you, Jorge, several others.
Alyssa Childers.
Alyssa,
Bobby Conway.
Childers will be there. Bobby Conway. We've got the standard lineup, which is a great lineup. So if you want to learn how to present apologetics and answer questions, you need to go to CIA and go to our website, crossexamine.org, for more of that. By the way, there's only 2 books that are essentially required for CIA. One is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and the other one is, you guessed it, Tactics. And now the new edition, so get it.
Okay, I got Mike asking, if I only ask my opponent questions, won't I be allowing him to suck up all the airtime with everyone listening?
Well, there's a point there, but if you are doing the game plan correctly, the advantage to everybody listening is that the guy's talking himself into a hole much of the time. Okay, again, if you listen to Frank ask questions of, well, you do because you're filming, but if the listeners will listen to Frank when he's asking questions at the university campus, he's using the third use of Columbo, and that is to using questions to make a point. And so he's using his questions to help expose a weakness or a flaw, usually, in the person's point of view. And as the person is talking, trying to answer the appropriate question that Frank asks, they're, in a certain sense, they're getting deeper and deeper into a hole, and everybody's watching sees that. So there's nothing wrong with letting the other person do the talking, because, if I want to be careful how I say this, but I know Rush Limbaugh said many years ago, if a person wants to make a fool of themselves, get out of the way. Okay. Now, the non-believer is not always making a fool out of themselves. That's not my point. But a lot of times they can make their point better than you can if your questions are properly put. And so that's really the point there. Let them, in a certain sense, talk as much as they want, in a way that if your questions are good, it's going to cause them to make your point for you better than you'll be able to do in that environment.
What do you say? Give a man enough rope and he hang himself?
Something like that, sure.
Yeah. All right, Daniel James Holland, this is a great question. He is, as a 17-year-old living with a mainly atheist family, how should I be interacting and enjoying talking about Christ during this time?
In the family environment?
Yes, and most of his family members are atheists.
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little insight about the lockdown situation we're facing. Apparently, statistically, crime has gone down and domestic violence has gone up.
Yeah.
Both are kind of understandable when you reflect on it. You know, being jammed together as a family is a hard situation. And I'll tell you, for the most, what I've been doing more, focusing on more, is personal virtue. How is God using the circumstance to strengthen and develop my virtuous character in the midst of our home. I got 2 daughters and my wife and 3 cats, and there's a lot of estrogen around here, So I have, and I'm not going out of town, and I'm not getting the breaks that normally, and they're not getting a break from me. And so I think for the teenager, I would focus, and this is actually across the board, it's not just during this time. You really have to focus on being a virtuous individual in your home environment, okay? Sometimes the most powerful arguments, so to speak, are not the ones that are spoken, but the ones that are lived out. And we have all heard time and time again of people who said, I became a Christian because of the godly conduct of some Christian that was close to me. I think Lee Strobel, for example, I mean, it's part of his testimony with his wife becoming a Christian. And then when he became a Christian, his daughter wanted to be like her changed father now. But lots of people, same situation. That is, they see the godly conduct of people that are in their community or even in their family. And this is the thing that made a big difference on him. If this teenager's whole family is atheist, okay, he's outgunned there. And so it may be not the best environment for him to try to deal with atheist arguments all the time, because that's just a lot of hostility. If instead he is paving the way with a virtuous life, living graciously and in appropriately submitted way to his parents and is kind and gracious and virtuous to his other family members, this could speak volumes to them, much more than any of the words could say. And it's fully biblical, at the same time.
It's great. Anthony Hopkins, who's a CIA grad, says, Greg, would you speak of a tactical conversation experience you had that didn't go well? What went wrong, and was the other person also an expert in the tactics you practice and teach?
Sure. The tactical game plan is not a magic bullet. There is no such thing, except for the Holy Spirit, but that's his job, not ours. We have our techniques that we can use, trusting God, and sometimes they work in the sense that we want them to work. They move us forward and allow us to kind of, put a stone in someone's shoe, is the way I like to put it, get people thinking, that kind of stuff, okay? Sometimes not, though. And so there are times when I'll ask some questions, and I will get basically a bored response. It's clear that the people don't want to talk to me. Or maybe they'll say stuff that I have no idea what to respond with, okay? In those cases, especially if I feel outgunned in a circumstance, I'm going to switch to student mode and try to find out as much as I can about that person's point of view and their reasons for it, so that next time around, I'm better suited to respond to it with additional questions. So the 2 things that I run into that are problematic are total lack of interest, and then I just move on. I don't feel obliged to push the river, so to speak, or I start getting responses from people who that I'm totally out of my depth. And I don't know how to deal with it at all. That's when I switch to student mode. I use my 2 questions. What do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion, to get the substance of their point of view? But I don't try to refute it. I'm just using that as an educational moment so that on my own, at my leisure, when the pressure is off, I can research the issue and come up with some answers and some questions.
Excellent. And just last question here, and it's a sensitive one. It says, how do we as parents help lead our our adult children who walked away in their teen years to Christ?
Well, I think the most important thing to ask a child or an adult child in that situation, and that might be even a teenager that's turning their back on Christ, etc., is the question, why? I have parents that'll meet with me at conferences, and they'll come up to me and they tell me these tales of woe, and I can understand it, about their child walking away and how forlorn they are and torn up about it. And I said, well, why did they walk away? They said, I don't know. I said, why did you ask them? I mean, to me, that's the most basic question. Now, some is understandable. If they go away from the protective environment of their youth group and their community that has been holding them up over the years, when they haven't gotten a good foundation in not only the substance of Christianity, but the reasons why it's true. And this is something, Frank, you guys all talk about all the time. If they haven't gotten it there, they get lost in high school before they go away to college. And when they go away to college, they just live it out. And then they have other appealing attractions. Those are, the sexual life and the drinking life and the party life and all that other stuff that nobody's looking over their shoulder telling them they should be involved in. And so consequently, there's they just often running. So there are cultural inducements and fleshly inducements, pardon me, that will attract them. But I think the first step is to find out what are your reasons why you think that Christianity is false. That's the key. And see what they say.
And you could, of course, follow it up with, if it were true, would you return? Would you become a Christian? Because I think you hit the nail on the head, Greg. And most of the people I deal with on a college campus, if I ask them if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? They'll say no. Because it's not an intellectual issue. It's a moral or volitional issue. They don't want it to be true because they want to be God of their own lives, and the God of the Bible is going to get in their way of them doing what they want to do. Now,
Frank, I know you asked that.
Did we just lose Greg with like a minute to go?
Something. Maybe not. I don't know. Let's see. He might come back in. He might not. He knows how to get back in, so we're going to wait for him. Frank, tell people about tomorrow's guest while he comes back.
Greg. We'll bring him back in a minute, but I want you guys to know that tomorrow's program will have Dr. William Lane Craig on. He is the top, for those of you that don't know, the top Christian debater probably over the past 35 years. And we're going to talk about arguments for Christianity, and you will be able to ask him some questions. Sorry, Greg, you popped out there for a minute. You were about to say, you asked that question a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious, is when they say no, they wouldn't become a Christian if you gave them good reasons. Do you follow up and ask them why not?
Oh, sure.
I suspect you do, but I'm curious what they say.
Yeah, as Richard Howe would say, 99 times out of 10, it's always about morality. They don't like the Christian God. They want to do their own thing. It's a moral issue. It's not an intellectual issue.
Right. That's true.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, fellas.
Well, it's been wonderful having you on, Greg. I want you to tell people about, you've got 2 podcasts, which I listen to every week. Tell them about the 2 podcasts and where they can hear them.
Well, one of them is what used to be our radio show, and both of these things they get on str.org and also on wherever podcasts are. Where's it? iTunes or wherever,
Yeah.
And Stand to Reason, looking for Stand to Reason. We have a second one that's 2 hours a week. And then we have a second one that's 2 25-minute segments that I do with Amy Hall. It's called #STRask. People go to Twitter, put in #STRask and ask us short question inside the word count or the character count. And then Amy and I will, on the air, read these questions, and we'll work together and answer those questions. So those are 2 things that people could listen to from Stand to Reason.
So if you want to hear Greg live and call in Tuesday at, I want to say it's 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. on the West Coast, that's when he's recording his show live. Right. And you can call in and talk to him on the phone, or you can use that STRask hashtag and send him a question that way, and he and Amy will answer it on that other podcast. So you have ways of getting to Greg with questions if you want to go further.
Sure.
Greg, it's been great having you on, and this book gives people a lot of hope because they can navigate questions or navigate a conversation with questions. So I want to urge people to get Tactics, and if you want to get a great story of reality, maybe you ought to get the story of reality too. It's right there.
I agree.
Greg, thanks for being on, and we're going to see you, obviously, in CIA, and maybe we'll do another Hope One broadcast here in the near future. Thanks for being on, brother.
Fine with me. Thank you, Frank. Jorge, great work.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, folks. William Lane Craig tomorrow. See you then.